computer science at Arizona State University. He studies fundamental problems in planning and decision making, motivated in particular by the challenges of human-aware AI systems. He is a fellow of Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, American Association for the Advancement of Science, Association for Computing Machinery, and was an NSF Young Investigator. He served as the president of the Association for Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, a trustee of the International Joint Conference on Artificial Intelligence, the chair of AAAS Section T, and a founding board member of Partnership on AI. Professor Subbarao will share his thoughts on generative AI revolution, what happens to our reality when AI can spill many synthetic realities. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. I hope you're able to hear me, and let me try to share my screen. Okay, you should now be able to see my screen, hopefully.
Yes, sir. Your presentation is visible, sir.
Okay, great. Thank you. And let me just make sure that it's there. Okay, so yeah, thank you for the introduction, and it's nice seeing all these very well-dressed sailors. It's like midnight here for me. It's nice and morning for you guys. So I'm going to talk to you about generative AI revolution. And part of it is actually, I did hear parts of some of the talks that went on earlier, and I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, and one of the things that's worrisome to me is AI is all over the place, but so are misconceptions about AI. Many people think that they understand exactly what are the implications and so on. And so my hope is not so much to kind of give you, like a boostering of AI systems, but to make sure that you kind of understand it at a level. I mean, maybe some of you do, but others, I want to make sure that you understand it at a level where you can tell what is actually feasible and what is not really feasible. And then the commercial vendors are just trying to bamboozle you into buying them. So anyway, that's what I'm going to do. As I said, I'm actually worried about the talks that went on before me too, because some of them were, falling prey to some of these errors. So that's why hopefully we'll get through them here. So let me just, before I start, let me just say that I'm from this little town called Peddapur, and in India, it's in Andhra Pradesh. And I, basically did not even know what Navy is as I was growing up, because we are nicely inside the mainland, and we didn't have to worry about wars that you guys will be once in a while fighting for us. So that's me when I was 9 years old. And when I was 9 years old, things changed, because it turned out that this submarine called Ghazi showed up from Karachi all the way to Vizag and got sunk there. I'm sure probably many of you weren't even around at that time, but anyway, this was like a big deal when I was growing up. And so I suddenly knew all about Navy and about submarines, and I was all, for a while, that's all I could think about. So when people called me up, and now of course I'm older and probably not that crazy about the whole war situation, but when people called me from Valsura and said, can you give this talk? I agreed to do this, even though it's midnight here, and even though you're not taking me on a ship or a submarine, just because for that 9-year-old self who had lots of fun thinking about submarines, etc. So that's what I actually tweeted, that my older pacifist self is getting a chance to address some sailors at their AI workshop this year. So that's a little thing about it. And so as they mentioned, I actually, although I'm talking about generative AI mostly today, my main research is really also about human AI interaction and human robot interaction. That's a group of my students and the kind of work we do and the books we publish and so on. And in particular, I'm most interested in having in this day and age, how do you get AI systems to provide explanations to us for their decisions that we can understand, and similarly take advice from us in the way that we will give it to them in our words, rather than trying to understand how ChatGPT wants to work and try to figure out what's the right way of prompting the system. Because to me, if AI has to be part of our lives, it better enter our land as against us entering its land. It makes no sense to me, for the AI systems to demand that we understand how they work. They should understand why we work, because I'm a researcher. Okay, so in fact, this is the kind of thing that becomes very important, because there was this question in the end of that last talk, and I was a little worried when somebody, I think the speaker pointed out that they are considering having AI systems pass judgments or whatever, the Nyaya chat GPT. That's the kind of thing horror films are made of, and I hope that we'll be very careful about doing those sorts of things. Anyway, in addition to this, I basically also spend a bunch of time, because AI has become very important and everybody wants to hear about it, a bunch of time giving these kinds of talks. In fact, the top of that list of talks, Generative AI Revolution, is something that I gave at Manthan, India in Hyderabad in March, which went on for 2.5 hours. I hope that I will be done much earlier there, because you have other things. But if you have questions, you might also want to look at that talk, because there's a long list of questions after the thing. I also spend a bunch of time writing public outreach articles. You might be interested in this series of articles I wrote on the Hill, on what just happened about the rise of AI and deep fakes, and what is the issues of biases in artificial intelligence. Will AI systems get along with us? And broad and shallow AI, which we'll talk about in a minute. And also, finally, ChatGPT. That's the stuff that we'll be talking about. And in particular, what is the best way to understand ChatGPT for educated lay public. So this is the kind of thing that I was going to be, that we've done that. So before we get into it, so I actually want to now get you to understand what changed in AI. This is only your fourth AI workshop. AI as a field has been around from 1956. You might be wondering, why didn't we have a lot more workshops in AI? Because things change quite significantly, and you're all interested in using the AI technology. And I want to give you some idea as to what actually changed at a meaningful level. So the trends in AI technology have been that one trend is, we used to, in the past, back in 56, 60s, even up to 90s, we would be having AI systems do tasks that we can tell them, we can program them to do. So these are tasks for which we know how we do them. There are things that we do, such as playing chess, playing Go, where we not only know how to do the task, but we know how we do them. And there are tasks such as looking at your dog and recognizing it, looking at your kid and recognizing our face. These are things we do, but we don't know how we do it. We cannot explain how we do it. And these tacit knowledge tasks essentially became a lot more, that was not actually attempted by AI systems before, but they are a lot more attempted since around 2012, 2013 onwards, which is basically perception, all of perception, hearing, seeing, etc. We do it without thinking how we do it, because we don't actually know how we do it. And this is one of the big changes in AI systems. That's one thing that you want to remember. The other thing is reasoning from specifications to learning from data. Around like Deep Blue, around the time of 1992, when Deep Blue beat Kasparov, that was a chess system that reasoned from the specifications of how the chess game is played. And so it did this humongous amount of search that would be very hard for us, and was able to defeat the master class chess grandmaster. More recently now, what we do, what the systems is try to learn most of this, whatever they do, from data. So that instead from specifications, they try to learn things from data. And that sort of became actually feasible only because we put all the data on the web. And this is something that we may or may not think about explicitly. But when I was growing up, and even when I went to school at IIT Madras, basically, there wasn't any web, there wasn't any pictures on the web, there is no voices, no audio, etc. on the web. And so it becomes much harder to learn from data. And the cell phone technologies and the web technologies help this thing to happen. The other trend in the AI technology, which is very relevant to today's talk, is that we went from deep and narrow AI systems to broad and shallow AI systems. So if you think about something like the chess chess playing program, the Deep Blue, it was extremely good at playing chess, and it can actually prove that its moves are the best moves possible. It's deep and narrow, and That's the kind of system that we use to construct in AI. More recently, the trend has become to develop systems that have broad expertise but are shallow in their reasoning power. So ChatGPT is a great example in point. It says everything in the most beautiful English or most beautiful Hindi, and because we civilizationally have this cognitive flaw that anything that sounds right must also be right, sounds good must also be right, we get confused by the form and think that the form is actually involves, shows that it is actually correct content. So this is the broad and shallow systems have become the more mainstay. Obviously, it would be better to have deep, I mean, it would be better to have deep and broad systems, and that's not yet possible. We are still working on that. And then finally, the last thing that may not make sense to some of you, and unless you have some technical background in machine learning, is that we went from discriminative classification, that is showing a picture and saying, can you see that it's a cat? Can you tell me whether it's a cat or a dog? Which is the kind of questions that we used to ask AI systems, to can you imagine a cat? Can you draw me a picture of a cat? Can you draw me a picture of a dog? And the interesting thing is, being able to recognize something doesn't necessarily mean that you know how to draw them. So it turns out that the discriminative systems were essentially able to recognize quite well, various pictures, but they still not be able to generate those pictures themselves, generate that text themselves, generate those voices themselves. And this is where the generative AI revolution comes in. So you are using the same data previously to actually kind of predict its target labels, such as what is the name of this animal, kind of a thing. And now we are using it to essentially look at the entire distribution of the data, and so that you can sample from the distribution and be able to kind of imagine cats, imagine dogs, imagine English stories, imagine voices, etc. That's what basically is generative AI systems. So you have heard of these. I mean, I'm going to very quickly show just to make sure that we are all in the same place. But so DALL-E, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney do this imagination generation for images. So suppose I said to you, a woman working on a computer, Jamini Rai style. I mean, I hope that there are some sailors from Bengal, or at least artistically inclined, that they know who Jamini Rai is. And so they will be already probably thinking of a woman in Jamini Rai style, and or a woman working on a computer, R.K. Lakshman style, this guy who was this cartoonist that, I hope some of you have seen. The interesting thing is, the moment I said this, you guys, and I don't see women in the audience, so, but I don't know, but most of you can recognize, kind of imagine some pictures in your mind already. It's just that you don't know how to draw them on the sheets yourselves, and that was the hard problem for you. Here is DALL-E basically taking woman working on a computer, Jamini Rai style, and producing that picture, which looks pretty much like, those of you who know how Jamini Rai pictures look, that looks like something that Jamini Rai would have drawn if he actually had like personal computer at his time. And that's the R.K. Lakshman picture. So pretty impressive that you can imagine, that systems can imagine this from whole cloth, just from the prompt. Okay, so this has become a big thing around last year, and in fact, this is New York Times article quoting me about the potential not only of imagining new things, but if you can imagine these pictures, then you no longer can trust your eyes. If you suddenly see, like for example, Modi ji, hugging Imran Khan, is that a real picture, or is that something that I just gave a prompt to DALL-E and it just generated that picture? There's something that you no longer can trust your eyes. This is something that you have to be worried. Not surprisingly, these are pictures of Pope wearing puffy coat, or Pope basically going around a nice motorcycle, all of which basically people thought they were real pictures, and it turned out that they were all essentially generative AI generated. They are fakes. They're benign fakes, so it didn't really cause too much damage, but you no longer can tell whether a picture is real or imaginary. Whisper and Wally do the same thing for voice. So if somebody calls you, if somebody calls you and then they sound like your mother, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's your mother anymore. It turns out that they actually can B, essentially this can be a generative AI producing your mother's voice from very small amounts, samples of it. And so that's basically, that's an talking about this back in like March when I was in India. They called me to ask about this. And so it turns out that, there are these kinds of scams already started happening. People are getting calls in their mother's voices and asking for money, their kids' voices saying they're kidnapped. This was something that happened in my neighborhood in Phoenix. A Scottsdale mom got a call from, in what she thought was basically her daughter's voice and saying that, Mom, I got kidnapped. Can you please pay my ransom? And this was real case. I'm not imagining. And so they came and asked me, well, how is this possible? So it turns out that essentially, right now, with just a few seconds of your voice can be cloned. This is amazing, but it also just opens up an entire Pandora's box of scams. Just when you're thinking that, oh, well, this is all the stuff that's happening in this good old USA, and India is still safe. My brother just sent me this article right in time from today's Hindu at 8/8/2023, from today's Hindu, saying, beware of AI-induced fake video calls seeking funds. I mean, we are all extremely good at, scamming each other. This is a completely new way of scamming where people don't even have to be involved. The AI systems are able to actually, generate voices that sound like some loved ones, and you will wind up falling for that. So that's actually possible. Now that finally gets to, so we talked about how the images can be generated, voices can be generated, then that leaves the text, which is, language. And LLMs, large language models, ChatGPT, GPT-4, Bard, and Bloom, and all these other things, including the smaller open domain ones like Llama. They are all these large language models. They seem to be generating answers to any textual prompt, and that's part of what was happening in these previous talks, where they were thinking that if you give it a prompt and it gives a nice looking answer, it must be correct. The problem is, as we'll see, just because something looks as if it is grammatically correct, Hindi or English, doesn't at all mean that it is actually true. And this is something that we didn't have to deal with before, because the people who are trying to scam you probably also spoke in bad grammatically wrong Hindi or grammatically wrong English. That's no longer required now. ChatGPT can write everything in highly grammatical form. So this was like a few minutes back when I had extra time. I thought I added this slide saying, write a 300-word funny essay that concludes that the Indian Navy is more capable than the Army and Air Force. Feel free to make some playful comparisons to Pakistan's military. I mean, after all, that's what I should be doing, right? I mean, I'm talking to you guys. So instead of me writing it, it wrote this nice big multi-paragraph essay. You should read this, it's also fun. For example, it says Pakistan military apparently only has special set of talents such as playing hide and seek, while Indian Navy is actually able to catch them. It says that the Air Force can have planes that go zoom, but you guys actually have planes that land on board, so you still win. And so in conclusion, Indian Navy is clearly the most capable branch of the military. So it nicely wrote an essay. So imagine the following, the English teachers, Hindi teachers, the language teachers are going crazy because they used to give these kinds of essay prompts and then expect kids to write essays and then grade them. Now they'll turn around and give that essay prompt to ChatGPT and it'll write the essay. And then what are you going to do? You actually have to read the essay to see, is this derivative? Is this actually something that is actually showing the original thinking by the student, etc., which is very hard. Grading is hard, and so people are very worried about it. So that's a possibility. Okay, so here's another example. I have some onions and eggplants. Can you tell me how to make sambar with them? There's a bunch of steps, there's a bunch of instructions, and I didn't actually use this to make this sambar. This is just a sambar picture for those of you who don't know what sambar looks like. Maybe you've never been to South, but so there is that is also possible. And then finally, why do women in Indian villages keep the bottom of the hot water boiling vessels black with soot without cleaning them? Those of you who have actually gone to villages, you know that the hot water boiling pots are full of soot in the down and the bottom, and they don't clean it. And it turns out that actually it's a great way of letting the heat conduct, and it actually provides that nice answer. And in March, I was showing this to my old physics teacher from my college days, because he used to ask these kinds of questions, and I was showing him that now you no longer can tell whether I know physics or not, because I'll take your question, give it to ChatGPT, and it'll tell me the answer. And that's life that we have. Okay, so why is it that even though we have voice and a language, and so voice and pictures have already can be generated, but the moment ChatGPT came along, everybody was a lot more worried. And I want you to take a few seconds to think about this, because language is really, really what makes civilization. Everything else comes second almost. And so it's almost like first it came for chess folk, AI can, beat chess giants, and we didn't panic because we are not all playing chess. Then it came for Go players, then it came for graphic artists. Now it's coming for essay writers, and all of us are writing essays, all of us are writing emails. That gentleman was basically, before me, was talking about this idea that he would give a few points to the ChatGPT. It will then write it into a big business mail. Guess what? When I get that business mail, I ask ChatGPT, can you convert it into a few points? So essentially what we are doing between each other is, we, instead of just talking to each other in these bullets, we are essentially increasing it to a much larger mail that just clogs up the network, and we are essentially going back to the bullets anyway. So this is the world that we are in. One of the very interesting things about this is people are extremely worried that GPT-4 was able to solve every possible standardized exam, LSAT, SAT, etc., AP calculus, and so on and so forth. And seems like, my God, it seems to be able to do reasoning too. And one of the things that I hope I'll get across to you by the end of this talk is that the difference between reasoning and regurgitation from memory becomes smaller and smaller if you have a giant memory. If you have read every possible question bank question for JEE, which is what those people in Kota make you do if you spend your entire lifetime in Kota, preparing for JEE, then essentially you don't have to do reasoning. You may just have seen this question in one of the many, like mugging sessions, and you are able to just remember from that memory. One of the good things about humans, one of the good or bad things about humans, is we have limited memory, so we can't remember everything. Plus, we also want to have a life, so we don't want to spend all our time studying. So once in a while, at least, we have to do reasoning from scratch. And whereas things like ChatGPT, they don't have any life. GPT-4 doesn't have any life. And one of the great things about standardized tests is that they all have standardized question banks. And so you can they are essentially all trained on all these standardized question banks. So it's not all that surprising that they do that well in these exams. Keep that in mind. Okay, so this is interesting, but what are LLMs actually trained to do? Are they really trained to solve like the SAT exams and LSAT exams, etc.? No, of course not. They're actually only trained to predict the next word given a sequence of words. That's it. So here is my example. Navy life is way better than Army and Air Force, question mark. What do you guys think is the next word, that question mark word? Most of you, I think, would say life. Okay, so that's like you're basically guessing the next word. As I'm speaking, you are sort of guessing the next word. And so if you are able to train yourself to predict the next word, then you can add that next word to the context and predict the next word after that, the next word after that. And that's exactly what ChatGPT does. Now, there is a very old idea corresponding to Claude Shannon, who is an information theorist, and who basically talked about these ideas called n-gram models, which basically said, given n words, can you predict the next word? And this is a very simple idea, and this basically says that there is enough statistical regularity in languages that if you know the context that of the n words, you probably will be able to predict the n+1th word easily. So for example, if I said left and, you would think right, because left and right go very well, right? If I say left and right and you say right, left and you would say right, I would say no, I actually meant to say left and center. Well, okay, you'll say, well, sometimes center can come after left end. So in essence, what you're trying to do when you're trying to learn the n-gram models of a language is you're trying to compute these what's called the conditional probabilities that any one of the words would be the n plus 1th word given the previous n words. So for every combination of n words, you need to be able to know the probability that a particular word can be the n plus 1th word. And if you know these probabilities, then you can essentially sample from them to pick the next word. This is exactly what ChatGPT is doing underneath all this hoopla. Okay. The only difference is that for the longest time, we were looking for n-gram models where n happened to be 1, which is called unigram model, 2, which means bigram model, 3, which means trigram model. Those are the number of contexts. That's the kind of context that we're looking at. That means given 3 words, can you predict the 4th word? Given 2 words, can you predict the 3rd word, and so on. If you think about ChatGPT, not even GPT-4, ChatGPT, you can think of ChatGPT as a 3001 gram model. That means given 3000 words, can you predict the next word? This is an enormous context. So it's actually able to keep track of an enormous context to predict the next word. And the interesting thing is, computing this at some level is extremely easy, honestly. You just have to keep track of whenever a particular sequence of word occurs, and you remember what is the next word, the teeth word, and then you keep the count of them, and you essentially take the, the number of, basically take the probabilities, that is count probabilities. That will give you essentially the conditional probability table. That's what from which you will be sampling. The interesting problem is that this is sort of like, those of you who know Archimedes, when he invented the principle of the lever, which is basically, if I have something, I can use the lever and then lift something. He was so drunk with this idea, he said, I can lift the universe if you give me a long enough stick and a place, a fulcrum to put the thing on. Looks theoretically possible, but practically a nonsensical idea, because how exactly can this be done? Essentially, that's what happens if you think about it for a 3001 gram model. If you think about how many different sequences of words can be there of 3000 word length. Okay, each word can be one of the words from the vocabulary. Imagine English has approximately 50,000 words. Then you have 50,000 times 50,000 times 50,000 times 50,000, 3,000 times. That means it's 50,000 power 3,000. And that would be the number of rows in that table. 50,000 power 3,000 would be the number of rows in the table. And if you ask your calculator, it'll say it's infinity. If you ask Google, it'll say it's infinity, because it's a huge, huge number. Compared to that, ChatGPT essentially remembers this conditional distribution table as an approximate function, and an approximate function which only has 176 billion parameters. You think 176 billion is huge, but it's tiny compared to 50,000 power 3,000. So that's what you want to keep in mind. And so this is basically how language models work. So in particular, if you're trying to train language models, when OpenAI says it's training language models, what it's doing is it's taking all the text on the internet, and basically it's using what's called autoregressive learning, a fancier name for self-supervised learning. So suppose I gave you my old sentence back, Navy life is way better than Army and Air Force life. It basically becomes a bunch of examples. Navy, if I say Navy, what's the next word? If we say Navy life, what is the next word? If Navy life is, what is the next word? And so on. And so basically, it winds up having, a single sentence becomes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 examples in this particular case. And given these examples, that the system essentially tries to train itself to guess the next word, look into the text to see what is the actual word, see the difference, and propagate that error back into these function states. And this is basically what's called neural network backpropagation. So in particular, if the LLM uses its current function to guess the next word, and when I say Navy, imagine the current LLM said Navy ships, because during training, it can be doing bad things. So it basically starts Navy ships. ships is reasonable completion as the second word. The guess is ships, but the correct one, according to your sentence, is life, because Navy life is what is in the actual sentence. So all I need to do is take the error, which is life minus ships. For many of you, life minus ships might be 0 because you guys are so much into ships, but really life is a word, ship is a word, and you can think of life and ship essentially in this neural network terminology as vectors in high dimensional spaces, and you are essentially taking the distance between these two vectors. That's essentially what the error winds up being. And once you have the error, there's standard techniques which basically use the kind of stuff that you would have learned in your calculus classes called chain rule of differentiation to back propagate this error, to little change these weights of the function, the 176 billion weights of the function, little by little by little. And you do this for every sentence, every sequence of every sentence of the 600 gigabytes of text on the web. That's all. That's essentially what OpenAI does. That's what Google does. That's essentially what they do in training these language models. And the problem is that doing this takes a lot of the computational power. So ChatGPT trains on 600 gigabytes of text, so it learns a very high capacity function. That's ChatGPT, which is like GPT 3.5. It learns a function that's 175 billion parameters, and it requires extreme compute facilities. And somebody drew this nice little graph showing that this was already shown to be wrong, but as of like the beginning of this year, somebody drew this graph saying the amount of money people are spending in actually training these large language models, if you sort of extrapolate it, then it will cross the US GDP little after 2020. After that, basically, we have no more money left. We can just train, a large language model. So that's the level of brute force training that's being done to produce these systems. There are interesting technical developments that happened after this, such as Facebook's Llama, which is a much smaller model that seems to have some of the similar advantages that ChatGPT and GPT-4 like systems do, but they're not completely equal. So, but this is something that you want to keep in mind. So given that this is all large language models are, why are people so impressed with them? Why are you also impressed with them? And so basically ChatGPT is just completing your prompt by repeatedly predicting the next word given the previous 3,000 words. So given 3,000 words, it predicts the 3,001th word. And then it shifts the window, takes the current 3,000 words, predict the next word, and just keeps predicting it. And that's how it wrote that essay about the Navy being much smarter than Air Force, etc. It did. There's nothing, no other magic. Okay. So, but the interesting thing is this function that it is using to predict the next word using this n-gram model. It's basically being done by analyzing like the entire web, which is about 600 gigabytes of text, and the learning phase is very very time consuming. But one of the interesting things is you might say that all of conversation is essentially putting one word after another word after another word. So I say something, you say something, then I say something, then you say something. So that's conversation. So maybe at least we have the syntax of what people do when they are doing language, and maybe that's why ChatGPT is working. So can we then say that ChatGPT can converse with you on any subject, which is what many of you believe, which is what some of the previous speakers also seem to have pointed out. Indeed, large language models look at everything as a prompt to be completed. They don't look at what you're asking as, oh, this is a physics question, this is a mathematics question, this is a question for essay writing, this is a question for summarizing. Nothing. It's basically just looking at whatever you write becomes the part of the context window of the 3,000 words. And as the 3,000 words change, the conditional probabilities change, because that's how we computed the conditional probabilities. So within that with the same way of doing prompts, you can ask it to say, write an essay, write a poem. You can ask, why did the Silicon Valley Bank fail? You can ask, explain all the ways Wildcats envy Sun Devils. These are like our rival school. And write some TXT code to produce a sketch of a unicorn. And those of you who may have read this, the press coverage of GPT-4 may have seen that people were like impressed because they asked GPT-4 to draw write a piece of code that would draw a unicorn, and it was able to do that. And that was that unicorn, and that was considered like the most impressive intelligence feat that GPT-4 did. Okay, now the interesting question that I want you to remember here is from the point of view of the large language model, what it is doing is essentially just completing the text such that the text is essentially from the same sort of distribution as the rest of the text on the internet. And the rest of the text on the internet has been put by people like you and me, essentially. Okay, so all it is doing is producing plausible text. And if you are finding meaning in it, it's your problem, not its problem. It's not guaranteeing any factuality. It is not guaranteeing that what it said actually has any meaning. Meaning, as Shakespeare said, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. ChatGPT's factuality is in the eye of the sucker who asks the question. And if the sucker doesn't actually know the answer, all bets are off. They are going to believe what ChatGPT said. Remember that poor farmer who asked the ChatGPT, would Modi's, new program give me how much money will it give me? And it confidently said 6,000 rupees. Who is to say whether that's correct or wrong? It turns out that there is no actual guarantee. Whereas if you're in fact indexing and retrieving, that's a database, and somebody takes the blame for the database being incorrect. If ChatGPT lies, nobody basically, in fact, there is this idea called hallucination. In fact, in the very last slide of the previous speaker, something called hallucination came, and there is this general feeling that people think that large language models sometimes hallucinate. It turns out, I'll say it in a minute, that it turns out that they always hallucinate. And sometimes their hallucinations correspond to your reality, so you are very happy. What else happens like this? Astrology. Astrology always hallucinates, and when it winds up being what happened to you, you say astrology is damn good. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. Okay, so but how do these prompt completion beasts generate such coherent, plausible text that also seems so right to you sometimes? Just like, how can astrology be wrong? It exactly told me what happened to my life, So the answer, it turns out, is magic, in the sense that we really don't have an actually good theoretical answer as to why a large n-gram model is able to generate text that is so plausible in the distribution of the text that can be produced. In fact, I have a column in CACM that says AI as an ersatz natural science, which basically says the whole AI became like poking these systems to see what they can do, as if you found some interesting animal in the neighborhood forest and you're trying to see what it do by poking it. So it became a natural science as against a mathematical science, and this is an interesting phase that we're going through. But there are some possible answers as to what this magic might be coming from. One is, of course, that almost everything we know is already on the web, and so basically these systems have approximate omniscience. They have been trained on everything on the web, and so they are able to potentially complete sentences that correspond to probably the thing that they may have heard of before. They're not indexing and retrieving, they're not veridical, but they have this approximate omniscience. And we don't really understand how much stuff is on the web. You all think you know what is on the web, but did you, for example, know that there are sites which will explain to you how the Robert joke works, why you are supposed to laugh when somebody tells you a Robert joke? I mean, so you are humor challenged and you read this site and it'll tell you when to laugh and when not to laugh. And that stuff is also part of the training data for the system. And so, in fact, they can sometimes explain how to understand jokes, quote unquote, for you. And then the other very important point is we really do not have any intuitions about how 3,000 word gram models are supposed to work. We understand unigram models, bigram models, but we really don't understand 3,000 word gram models. And the GPT-4 is 800K context. So it becomes even bigger. And so our intuitions are all gone because they're looking at gigantic context, but then using a very sparse function to approximate it. That's basically what we are doing, and that might explain that stuff. So are there limitations to prompt completions learned from our digital traces? When will bookish knowledge of the thing that these things are learning not be enough? So it turns out that we do read, but we are not just completing next word. We at least don't seem to think so ourselves. And the point is we actually have the ability to connect our knowledge to the physical world and essentially, provide meanings to the words. Whereas the language LLMs are essentially completely in terms of how words are statistically connected to other words, and that sometimes is enough, but it's not guaranteed to be completely enough. And so they can hold forth on pretty much best type of mangoes and describe how they taste, but they have never tasted a mango, so they can there's that difference, for example, between you and them. So one of the big things the minimum thing that I want to make sure that you get out of this is, can you then use LLMs to do search, like that poor farmer who is being asked, you don't know how to use Google, so why don't you just use my, ChatGPT interface? The problem is when ChatGPT does generation, it is not indexing and retrieving, it is generating text from scratch. All you know for sure is that the text it generates is plausible. There is no guarantee that it is actually true. And the only people who will know truth are the ones who actually know the truth. So, for example, I asked, Perplexity, which is a search engine based on something like ChatGPT, what is the closest Mexican restaurant to Tempe downtown, where actually I'm standing right now while I'm talking to you? And it came up with these answers saying Manuel's Mexican restaurant is the closest. And it turns out Manuel Mexican restaurant is like 5 miles away. And if I just come out of this building, I'm surrounded by Mexican restaurants. I know that. You don't know this. So if you ask this question, and it came up with this answer, you would think that might be right. And then you'll come all the way to Tempe to find that you'll go to this wrong restaurant. That would be wasteful. Okay. And it's the same thing for, the newer language models. So here's another thing that you guys should do, especially those of you who have done enough that, there may be, digital traces of you on the web. I asked ChatGPT GPT-4 actually, to write a 300-word biography of myself. And it wrote this. Nice look biography. My mother would be proud of it, if she reads it. The only problem is some of it is right, some of it is wrong. And the stuff in the red is wrong. You guys won't know that it's wrong. It all looks reasonable. I mean, some, dweeb who is a professor could potentially have done this stuff. There could be professors like this, but I am not that professor. I didn't do those red things. And only I would know because I actually know the truth in this particular case. So not surprisingly, ChatGPT invented a sexual harassment scandal and named a real law professor as an accused guy. And that poor guy had to go through hell. And this is the kind of thing that I'm worried about when you say ChatGPT Nyai, for example. Our ChatGPT falsely told voters that their mayor was jailed for bribery and he might now sue because he never actually jailed for bribery. And more recently, one lawyer actually used ChatGPT to write a legal brief that they presented to the judge. And legal briefs, you are supposed to give case names. And so he made the legal brief, he just asked ChatGPT, just as you guys might do, because it seems to be working. So it just made up a whole bunch of case names. Case names typically look like name versus name, Plessy versus Ferguson. Okay, and so it realized that pattern and it started making up things like Martinez versus Delta Airlines, Varghese versus China Southern Airlines. And they all look like cases. Turns out they are not real cases. And if it matters to you what is real and what is imaginary, then you should be very careful because there's no guarantee that what ChatGPT writes, it looks extremely like a law brief that people have written, but it's just not right. And so in fact, this guy got disbarred almost because the judge did the mistake of actually checking whether those cases existed and they didn't exist. And so that was the way it was. So to cut a long story short, basically the thing that you want to keep in mind is the pure LLMs can do only a search by imagination. So you ask me a question, I imagine the answer. If you think that's the way questions are supposed to be answered, you are in big trouble because there is something called factuality. What LLMs are great for is writing screenplays, because that's not a trivial thing. To be able to write screenplays, the movies that you see, they have to be close enough to the real life, but should be also entertaining. It should be like this interminable songs and all that stuff. But it's not, you're not walking out of the movie saying it's not real, it didn't happen, unless it says it's a documentary. All that matters is that the movie is in the plausible plane of realities that your reality exists in. Whereas when you ask a question to a system like a search engine, you're checking whether it exists in the current reality that you inhabit, not whether it is possible, but whether it is actually true in the single reality you are in. And for that, I would still suggest that you use Google, not ChatGPT. So don't do LLMs to do search, because that red stuff basically says all LLM completions. It's not that LLMs sometimes hallucinate. All LLM completions are hallucinations. Sometimes some might align with your reality. And that's sort of, it can increase, the probabilities can increase, but unless you know for sure what is the correct answer, you are in big trouble. Now that can get you to, can LLMs do reasoning? Are they really able to reason things to answer these, exams and so on? It turns out that there are very good reasons to believe that they're essentially doing approximate retrieval. It turns out one of the things that people miss is every standardized test has a standardized question bank. And the harder part of doing tests is coming up with questions. As a teacher, I know that there are only so many questions I can come up with for any exam. And so I tell students, please don't, share questions. And they'll say, yeah, looks, we're not going to listen to you. We're going to put all our questions that, that came on our exam on Course Hero. Other students see it. And so they don't have to listen from first principles. And that's even more so for standardized exams. So the reason why you wind up thinking that these things are doing reasoning, even though they may actually be just doing retrieval, is because we have very poor intuitions about approximate omniscience. We have never in our lifetime seen anybody who knows something, even if it's not right, about every possible topic in the world. There may be people who are called polymath. They might know math as well as quantum physics, as well as Vedanta. But we are talking about this thing which knows everything, but nothing is guaranteed to be correct. And we don't have any intuitions about these kinds of things. And so it becomes very easy to think that they have capabilities that they don't actually have. So in general, as I said, memory reduces the need to reason from first principles, which is why it's no longer worth being surprised if there is like a tough, interview question that people are using to check whether people are good or bad, people can do certain job or not. If you can actually mug it up, then you no longer have to reason from scratch. So we have actually shown this, that they can't even do stacking of blocks correctly. It turns out that if you change the names, they can't even stack blocks correctly. The probability that they can do block stacking falls down drastically to like 0.4%. And this is a paper that is being reviewed right now. And then one last thing that I want to bring up is there's a lot amount of things about knowing how to prompt these systems, and maybe they're wrong, but you can keep asking them until they become right. First thing you have to ask yourself is, if you know the answer, why are you asking a ChatGPT? Are you just testing it, or are you trying to use it? Okay, it's like the kind of things that we do as parents. We might check whether your kid knows something or not by asking them. That makes sense. But why do you want to waste your time checking whether ChatGPT knows the answer for a question for which you know the answer? And if you don't know the answer, no guarantees that what it gave you is actually correct. And that is something that you have to understand. Okay, so in fact, there was a very famous horse called Clever Hans in Europe. And this horse used to do arithmetic. If you ask it 7 plus 4, it will stomp its hoof 11 times. And if you ask it 4 plus 9, it will do it 13 times. And it was going with its owner from place to place in Europe, and everybody was very impressed. And it turned out that what psychologists found is this horse doesn't do any arithmetic at all. What it was sensing is it was sensing the stress level in its owner. And the owner knows the answer, and the horse, let's say the answer is 13. When the horse comes up to 12, the owner's stress level keeps increasing, just as I'm sure Commander Madhusudan's stress level is increasing right now as I'm coming closer and closer to the time of my talk. And that's all I'm trying to guess, not whether or not actually what the time is. And so that's what ChatGPT was doing. And so in a way, I made this joke up. I mean, it's a meme, well-known meme, but I converted it into saying that impressive reasoning abilities of LLMs are all dependent on prompter knowing the answer. And if you know the answer, then why are you wasting your time? If you are knowing the answer, the entire thing about prompting is somehow keep nudging them until they give the correct answer. By the way, this is well known that many people who go to astrologers do this. They wind up giving away enough amount of information about their life, which then the astrologer feeds them back, and then they're extremely impressed that the astrologer knows what happened in their life. This is chain of thought prompting. You can do that to astrologers or large language models. So I'm going to skip. One thing I want to make is there are some good things that LLMs can do, which basically is that they are actually good at getting approximate knowledge, which can then be used by sound reasoners to improve, that starting from that knowledge, they can actually do reasoning. And so in the old days in artificial intelligence, there used to be this idea called you'll talk to the experts, get the knowledge, convert into rules, and then put it in a knowledge base, and then some rule-based system will reason about them. This has been called the good old-fashioned AI, and it didn't work as well. People gave up on it, and people started trying to learn everything from scratch. What changed now is with LLM, that whole thing, this is LLM. So you basically can ask LLM any question about what should be done in this particular chemical plant in this particular case. It will give you an answer, and if the human expert is in the loop, they can very quickly improve the answer until it becomes correct, at which the knowledge base, and you can start using it. This is a great way to use LLMs, and similar, where what is right or wrong, and you just don't have the time to put together the farm, then LLMs are great to use. So we have papers on that. And the very last thing I want to do is, of course, this stuff has great uses. That's why you're all interested in hearing about these things. But there are also all these worries that you need to be worried about. In addition to the fact that they cannot actually be factual, there are plagiarism worries, there are deepfakes worries, there are bias worries, because essentially they're completing text based on the text that they have seen. One of the most interesting points that I just actually recently tweeted the other day, by the way, my Twitter address is Rao2Z, and you can follow me if you want, and mostly I talk about this sort of stuff. When I have international students, and they'll write stuff in, sort of accented English, and then ask ChatGPT to convert into quote unquote better English. And depressingly, it started sounding like those business manuals, the kind of stuff we make fun of, because they're deadeningly meaningless but well-written English. And why? Because most of the English on which ChatGPT has been trained on is essentially business English. And the stuff that we're making fun of, so it actually sounds like that. Unless you ask it to sound like something else, its default is that. And just similarly, if it's been trained on a lot of sexist English, then it's going to actually generate completions that sound sexist to you. Does ChatGPT think it's being sexist? No, it doesn't think anything. It's just basically giving the next word, and that's the only thing that you want to remember. So I'm going to actually stop because we have time. There's not much enough time now, but these are like the societal issues that we should be worried about, but I think I brought most of them. I'm going to stop here with this as the impacts, and if you have any questions, you can ask me. If not, as I said, there are longer versions of this with Q&A session in my YouTube channel that you can actually use, and you can always send me email or just send a message on WhatsApp. I think Commander Masudan has my WhatsApp message. And I'm going to stop here and thank you for your patience. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the interesting talk. We now move on to the Q&A session. Questions from the on-site audience.
Yes, go ahead.
So thanks so much. Thank you very much, sir, for this really good session. So this is more an opinion on which I will request your elaboration. So when we started off with this revolution of data analytics, I think 5-7 years ago, we used to deal with the structured data piece. For any kind of equation-based modeling, we used to create one hypothesis, and against that we used to test the data. Okay, so we had this flexibility of dropping the x against this was the I mean, there could be multiple techniques. Now what is happening right now is that we are using, I mean, this revolution of AI has brought the mathematics closer to the people, because very few people, deal with the structured data which is stable. More people deal with the video, text, and images. Now, what I feel is that the way you said that there are perils, these are approximate knowledge. So I think that chapter of testing the hypothesis, which used to be the part of classical statistics, should be brought back to minimize the type 1 error. I think the new revolution of AI, what is missing right now is the testing of the hypothesis. So when I used to be into my MPhil classroom, there was a sampling professor. He said that without testing the hypothesis, you are simply, unchaining a tiger in a room and you are keeping the bolt open.
Okay.
So yes.
So my answer to that is, first of all, you are in the right track. I think much of what you're talking about is essentially about discriminative learning. Most classical statistics is really about discriminative learning. In the case of generative learning, whether it is structured data or unstructured multimodal data, ultimately what you're learning is the density of the data. And so there is a slightly different issues there. And certainly, the kinds of skepticism you're bringing to the table is exactly the skepticism I want people to have, and that's exactly the skepticism the research community also has. It's every hugely hyped up idea, and AI is like the super hyped up idea right now. I'm very happy. I'm an AI guy. I've been working on it way before it was cool. I was working on it in '83 when I was in IT Madras. But the point is, it is important to understand what part is hype and what part is actual power, and then use the power of it, but also try to improve the things that are missing. And certainly, what these systems do is essentially understand the underlying distribution of the data. And it's a non-trivial thing. So if you think about a picture, ultimately a picture is nothing but, let's say, 250 by 256 grid with intensity numbers. And if you change the intensity numbers, the picture changes. Most of the intensity numbers you put on the picture will look like noise, but a very few of them will look like actual real world objects, like a cat or a train or like a parliament building or something. And the interesting question is, if you are trying to sample from the distribution of real world objects, you need to learn the distribution of the real world objects in terms of this, intensities. And that's what generative AI has been able to do. And saying that I learned the distribution and saying that I'm also correct at the instance level means that you don't understand distribution, because the distribution only means that it's plausible. You can sample it's in the plausible kinds of images that people can draw, as again as saying this is the exact thing that you have seen. So there's another example that I forgot to mention. 2 days back, there's a New York Times article about this woman who wound up being falsely accused of essentially carjacking somebody. She happens to be an African American woman. The police basically did face recognition on the victim and decided it is this woman, and then they tried to put her in the jail, and then now she's suing the heck out of them. But the reason that happened essentially is the generative AI systems, as well as the systems which kind of compare images, basically look for the closest matches. And that doesn't mean, the closest match doesn't mean it's actually the specific individual who committed the crime. And so again, face recognition is something that makes a lot of us lose sleep. I know that many countries, including India, is rushing headlong into this. We should be careful. I mean, all civil societies have this dictum that let 1,000 guilty go free, not a single innocent should be punished. And the 1,000 is falling down to 100, 10, 2, etc. And that's not a good thing for a civil society. We should be careful about how we use some of these technologies. Anything else?
Thank you, sir. So there is one more question, an online question by Command Information Technology Officer, Southern Naval Command. Over to the online question, sir.
Go ahead. What is that? I can't see anything here. You may have to read it for me or something.
Sir, an online question will be posed to you, sir.
Yeah, but I can't see. I don't. Oh, yeah. Okay. I don't know. Is it in the chat or something? I mean, I'm not sure where it is. So chat. Is it in the chat? Yeah. Okay. Okay. So let's see, where is this? The question. Okay, where is the question? Oh my God, there's lots of questions. I better save these.
He
Uh,
asked you, sir. It will not be in chat, sir.
what?
Sir, he asked you in person, sir. Vocally, sir, not in chat, sir.
Yeah, I think whoever has the question should just speak up because it's very hard for me to see as I'm talking to you here. So I'm happy to answer, but if I know the question, I can answer in lots of questions, but I need to know what the question is.
Captain Mahesh sir, CITO SNC sir.
Okay.
So I have two questions sir. First is sir, Chat GPT also is generating code sir.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
how is the code generation different from the LLM? And my second question is sir, like you stated that nowadays the thrust on research is on tacit understanding of human sensory perception. So
Mhm.
is there also anything about the controlling of the motor functions? Like for example, sir, just a very vague example, when Kumbhakarna was asking for the boon from Brahma, so
Mhm.
Saraswati intervened and changed his speech. So can we put some agent or some research is happening how to control the motor nerves through AI?
Okay, so that both are extremely good questions. Let me answer both of them. So in terms of the code, one of the very interesting things about ChatGPT, can you guys hear me still? Okay, one of the very interesting things about ChatGPT is it's actually language insensitive. It's looking at everything as a sequence of tokens. It is not even actually thinking in terms of English or Hindi or whatever. So it's just given 3,000 tokens, can I predict the next token? And if the tokens are as together to you look like code, then it becomes code. If they look like English to you, then it becomes English. If it looks like Hindi to you, it becomes Hindi. So it doesn't actually know the difference. It basically thinks that Hindi sentences typically will be followed by Hindi words, except with a couple of English words thrown in because we can't speak Hindi without using English once in a while. But so the code can be generated this way, but it turns out that the code doesn't have to be correct either. The thing that saves in the context of code, the thing that saves people is there are code interpreters that can very quickly look at a large piece of code and point out what syntactic errors are. And sometimes that can save your time quite significantly. But there are also cases where there is nothing wrong syntactically with the code, but it has a logic error, in which case you might wind up spending a lot more time trying to debug that stupid piece of code that ChatGPT gave you than if you wrote it from scratch. And this has happened just as often. People basically find that for things that are pretty repetitive, essentially it can give the code and the interpreter can check for any errors. Remember that syntax errors can be checked in programming languages, but logical errors cannot be checked. And so that's what happens in the case of a code situation. In the context of using LLMs to kind of affect the outside world, which is like the motor control, that you should be very careful about. In fact, that's my life. When I said ChatGPT cannot make plans, what I'm saying is the plans that it comes up with sound like plans, but they actually don't work. In fact, there's another New York Times story where this woman asked ChatGPT to come up with the recipes. The one that I showed you for sambar, I didn't make that sambar using that recipe. If I made it, maybe it would actually be very terrible. And it turned out that she actually made all the recipes for Thanksgiving that ChatGPT gave, and they came all terrible. And it turns out that plans that it generates don't have to be correct. And in one of the bigger problems in doing action in the world is you can actually lead to large number of deleterious consequences. Things can blow up. Things can, people can be, harmed. And so you should be careful about how LLMs are being connected to the real world in terms of action.
Thank you, sir. So we would like to take more questions, but due to time constraints, we are moving forward. Thank you
Sure.
for the amazing talk, sir. We are grateful to you for delivering this midnight session on AI. Whether or not ChatGPT, sir, Indian Navy is the best force.
Yeah.
Next time you come to India, sir, we do visit us. We would love to host you, and we
Thank
should be taken to a Navy ship or submarine, sir.
That would be
Thank you,
great.
sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I now request the audience at Lighthouse to please convey their appreciation in a service-like manner. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
I request all present here to please be seated. We are taking a break for 05 minutes.
Thank you.